Hey, Self-Made Nation. Here on the Cash Rich Exit podcast, we're talking to Dr. Lindy, and I'm going to cut it off there because I'm going to totally mess up your last name.
Okay.
But I was introduced to Dr. Lindy as she's now a banker. So academic tech founder to banker. We're going to have
Yep.
a thorough conversation about this journey and how it's, you know, far from a traditional career projection, but here we are today. So thanks so much for being on the show, Dr. Lindy.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Colleen. And you can just call me Lindy. It doesn't have to be Dr. Lindy. I mean, I've earned it, but it is
Yes.
just Lindy. You
Well,
don't have to feel
okay,
like the
so
doctor has to come in.
right, I get it. But as an aside, I think it's very important, especially as women, that we own our achievements. And so, yeah, if we're a Dr. Lindy, we're Dr. Lindy. But sure,
That's true.
we'll have a casual conversation here, and
Yes.
we'll chat a bit. We'll chat as Lindy and Colleen. But frankly,
Yes.
I think it's very important that we acknowledge those achievements and we don't downplay them. So, uh,
Yes. Yes. Well, I will on that point, and I do agree, and I thank you for the sort of corrective, and I do think it is important, especially for for young women coming up to be able to kind of model the acceptance of our own accomplishments. And just one
mhm.
funny point on the Dr. Lindy part. So I defended my PhD the same year that I got married, but I defended my PhD before getting married, so I could be doctor and never misses. So that was the way that I
Okay,
kind of got around that.
brilliant. That's perfect. I love it. I love it. I love it. Okay, so let's go back to somewhat the beginning, right? What first of all interested you in what you studied initially, which was literature, can lit, so forth.
Oh, there we go. Just one
Oh,
second. You froze for a second, and I don't know if it was you or me, but you froze on like this beautiful smiling face. So that was one. So it was lovely. But I was saying, oh,
yeah.
Colleen, are
And
you?
is it back?
Yeah, yeah, it's back.
Okay, I did
Perfectly
see a
fine.
little thing come up saying my internet is unstable. I don't know what's going on, but
Okay.
let's keep plugging
Yeah.
through and see how far we
Okay.
get.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
So, I was asking about what interested you in literature and your sort of humanities studies in the first place.
Yeah. So, as a young woman, as a young kind of scholar, finding myself in the world, as a young undergraduate student, even as a young high school student, I was always a reader. So I always, liked the imaginative world. That was the place that I would escape to, would be into books and stories. But then as I started to be a little bit more scholarly in my approach to things, I had, questions about the world. What does it mean to be Canadian and post multicultural Canada? What does it mean? What is the identity of this nation? How do we kind of tackle those larger questions of belonging and not belonging, and who decides who belongs and who does? Questions that I'm interested in as a young person in the world. And I wanted to learn a methodology, a scholarly methodology, to be able to start to figure out how you answer those large questions about the world that you live in. And the opportunity presented itself to begin to explore answers to those questions by diving deeply into literature that focused on those questions and trying to say, well, if I was an author, what would I say about these questions? And can I approach a case study of texts that have asked these kinds of questions, and see if what they have to say provides some answers or some insight into these questions that as a young woman I'm interested in. And that kind of was the impetus to get on the quest to do a master's and then PhD. And I focused on Ukrainian Canadian literature and English. And again, because that was the case study in part, I was like, well, these are authors writing about identity politics, not from a racialized minority position, not necessarily from an immigrant position. They are Canadian born. Their first language in many cases English or French. They're third or fourth or fifth generation Canadian. So, but yet this Ukrainianness, this ethnic identity, still matters years and years after. And so that's an interesting case study to look at these questions of identity politics. So that's how I got on that path and ended up as a professor.
That's fascinating. And I know we really want to dig into the business and the startup, but maybe for another day, it kind of is reminiscent of me and my family, and it's the Irish heritage. And we're far removed from our family having immigrated, yet it plays such a big part of our culture and our reading and so forth. Anyway, well, some other day over.
Topic for another day. But yes, in the preface to my dissertation, I do talk about Irish Canadians. So yes, we are on the same page. These are some of the same kinds of questions. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So that takes us to the doctor part, right?
Yeah.
And then and what was the transition from academia to tech founder? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah. And I've been asked this kind of question before, like, how do you go from English professor to tech entrepreneur? And, it just seems really strange. And in some ways too, I think when we look at our professions and our careers, broadly speaking, it's helpful sometimes to not think about like the job title or the field, but about the personal characteristics that you have that are the through thread throughout your professional career. And so one of the things for me, like, is I'm curious and I'm a problem solver. So as I was talking about, wanting to become a scholar, it's not that I went in to become a professor or a scholar. I was attracted to the puzzles and the questions and wanted to solve some of those problems. So then when I became a professor, there were a whole new set of puzzles and problems that I then was like, okay, well, let's see how I can solve them. And one of the most pressing was that students at the undergraduate level were ill-equipped for the rigors of academic writing. And it often wasn't their fault. There are lots of reasons, students who have had, poor training in high school, or they don't know the genres of academic writing or whatever. And if you're a professor, you have 12 weeks to teach content. So that content could be Canadian literature, could be history, could be philosophy, whatever. You don't have time to teach the basics of writing. And so I started to think, okay, is there a way that I can develop software in this space to help level the playing field when it comes to academic writing? And then, so I developed that software, but then you realize, okay, well, you're not just developing a product, you need a business that is the engine that drives that product forward and out into the world.
So you, again, going back to the problem solving, you saw the problem and built a solution, and in that was also a business. Yeah.
Yes.
That's what entrepreneurship is, period.
That is what so yeah, I mean, people in entrepreneurship, they'll talk about, what was the gap in the market that you saw? And sometimes entrepreneurs are really smart and they identify a gap in the market and they fill it. Sometimes it's not that self-aware that you are filling a gap in a market. It's that you've seen something that you feel uniquely positioned to solve in the world. And so you kind of follow that. And in so doing, you develop a recognition that there's a gap in a market and you can build a business around this thing that you were drawn to.
Out of a bit of more of a happenstance, but becomes developed. Yeah. So that business was EssayJack. Okay.
You betcha. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So EssayJack, because again, as I say, it was an academic writing solution. So the essay, and you're going to jack your essays, EssayJack. And so what it was smart templating for genres of academic writing. So that could be the analytical essay, a case study, compare contrast. So all of those genres that you find typically in liberal arts and humanities subjects.
And maybe a bit of a quote unquote art that is getting lost in our world today, given the access to the hack of, artificial intelligence.
EssayJack was definitely pre-ChatGPT, but ultimately, like, what EssayJack and what scholars are trying to do in terms of like the art of thinking and writing critically is to develop that muscle to be able to think about hard problems. Text generative AI kind of gets you to the end result without necessarily teaching the steps along the way. And so that's where, teachers and educators can kind of use that technology to teach the process. So it's a different world we're in now, but certainly still really interesting in terms of what is that interaction between, you know, tech and writing and thinking.
No less important, though, even though we have the tools, maybe more important, so that we need to be able to have our critical thinking. We can't just be plug something in and get it out. Like calculators way back in the day, you know, served a function to allow us to actually be able to think more, as opposed to having to, you know, if you think that way. Okay, so let's talk about your experience as a founder, and probably I'll ask all these same questions. Like, you know, maybe not your biggest challenge, but let's talk about maybe one of your more interesting challenges. To overuse the word interesting in the world here, but and maybe overuse the word challenge. Obstacle that turned into an opportunity. Let's word it that way. What was fantastic obstacle that became an opportunity?
Yeah. So one of the obstacles or challenges, or, you know, is that I had to learn how to get out of my own way. And that took me a little bit longer than it should have, in the sense that, as I say, I was kind of solving a problem, which then meant once I had invented this thing called EssayJack and a smart templating, and it was, you know, amazing, and the world had never seen anything like it. I was really in love with the product, and didn't think dispassionately about what that meant when I was not just thinking about the product, but thinking about the business. So all of the things, go-to-market strategy, ideal customer, your financial profile, all of that, I kind of, and I don't know if this was like a lag of my academic training or whatever, like those mundane details, I kind of thought like, well, somebody else will sort that out. They will figure out, you know, how to sell, or somebody who, you know, knows finance, they will figure out the financial modeling. My intervention is the creativity that has created this amazing product. And so it was changing my own mindset and having to realize that, as in love with the product as I was, I had to learn how to be equally in love with the entire process of the business. I had to learn how to love sales. I had to learn how to love financial modeling. I had to learn how to love figuring out the go-to-market strategy, and all of those technical details about building a business. I had to love as much as the amazingness that was the product. Otherwise, it would fail. And so that was the big challenge. It was learning to see the entire enterprise, not just the EssayJack product, but EssayJack Incorporated as a business, where all parts had to be things that I thought were worth my time, attention, creativity. And only when I kind of really wrapped my head around that were we able to kind of grow and figure out and articulate our business strategy and really become a business, as opposed to just like, hey, we're a product and sure, we sell it, you know.
Build a better mousetrap in a way, but I mean, it was filling a gap. It was, how do you get that message out and find the right placement? A lot of very traditional aspects of product to business. And I would say probably a lot of the ways in which you're helping those who are, you know, in your sphere ecosystem now at RBC X, but I don't want to jump there just yet, because.
So as a literary professor, we would call that foreshadowing. So we're foreshadowing something that's to come.
Exactly. And of course, I do have a number of questions here, but I prefer when we go down this path and it's way more natural. So I'm sitting here for a moment and thinking, I want to know a little bit more about. So you figured those pieces out, right? That natural challenge of, you have a great product. I need to fall in love with the other aspects of building the business around the product. So clearly you figured some of that out.
Some of it, I mean, not so clear. Like, I still think even at the time
Yeah.
we exited EssayJack, there were still, some questions that, we hadn't fully ironed out. And I think that's also part of a business that I had to wrap my head around, is that it continues to evolve and revise, and there are always new data inputs that come in, and the context changes from week to week, month to month. And I mean, so for context, we launched EssayJack in 2015. Our world in EdTech changed by 2020 with COVID. And
Right.
so we were still in early days, and the everything that we had built and predicated our business and business model on kind of went out the window basically overnight, while we were faced with a global pandemic, and the way in which people started to think about their education technologies and what was required, and what went from being a nice to have to a must have, and all of that changed. We were still just figuring out some of the details of growing and scaling that business, and then the world changed, and that's a dramatic example. But there are often these smaller examples day in, day out about changes that happen that kind of make you revise. Okay, well, we thought we were going to do A, but now we're going to do B. And then, next week we kind of do a little bit of like B plus, and then maybe some C, and, it just kind of changes along the way.
There was the iterative process, and then there was the proverbial pivot that happened because the world went into this space that we now all have a blur of, COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, we've
right?
all kind of blocked it out.
Yeah. What helped you make that bridge for yourself between here's the product and I need to fall in love with these other aspects? Was it a light bulb moment? Was it a mentor? Was it, did you hire, business coaching? Like, how did you end up bridging that aspect?
So there were probably two big parts that contributed the most to kind of dragging me kicking and screaming from being like a rah product person to then understanding, that I was representing a business. And the first is fairly early on. So about, a year into, sort of post-launch, and it was still kind of a beta product in the world, we were able to secure a national channel sales partnership agreement with Nelson Education. So Nelson Education is one of Canada's longest standing, it was textbook, publishers.
That's how I remember it.
Textbooks. Yeah. So, but, by 2015, when we, 2016, I think is when we started talking to them, they were already aggressively moving into the digital education space. And so kind of looking for partners and figuring out what their next step was as a longstanding educational company. And so what they had was, for years and years and years, they had sales teams across Canada in schools, colleges, and universities selling textbooks. And so what our partnership meant was that those same people, instead of saying, hey, do you want to buy this composition textbook, they could go, hey, we have EssayJack. We can sell you subscriptions to that. And so that was really helpful for us, because firstly, it forced us to have to grow our understanding of the business to be able to partner with a national, like a company with sales team across the country, because that meant we had to train the sales team. We had to understand what their KPIs were, how we partnered with them. What does that contract look like? What are all those details from a very businessy perspective? And I didn't have the luxury in dealing with them to just be like, hey, I only care about the product. I had to figure out all of those other components to be to be taken seriously, and B, to actually roll out a strategy and a relationship with that company to company, to make it work and to be a value add for both teams. And so that was part of it, that it kind of dragged me along, but it also exposed me to the way that corporation thought about the education business. And so I was able to very quickly have a front row seat to how they were thinking about it, and then kind of take some of those learnings. And then simultaneously, so in early 2016, we joined LSpark, which is an incubator in the Ottawa, Canada region Now I think it's in its 11th year. At the time, I think we were cohort number 2, so early days.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But one of the mentors there, Leo Lax, who is still a driving force behind LSpark to this day, kind of supporting tech companies and the ecosystem more broadly. And at the time I was like, well, I don't know if we want to even do investment. Like, we're trying to grow this company and bootstrap, and we still aren't sure ultimately of the viability of this product as a company. So that was kind of where I was in early 2016. And what Leo said was, it doesn't matter if you've decided on whether you're going to seek external financing or fundraising or anything like that at this point. At this early stage, you must pretend as though you will, because that will put a certain kind of financial and business discipline on you in the internal decisions you make. You will be tracking things. You will be recording your metrics. You will be, on top of your due diligence with your finance and your legals and, all of those sorts of things, because in the back of your mind, you are prepping for a potential investment. Now, you may choose to never.
I love what you're saying
that.
here. Yeah, I love what you're saying here, because this is about creating the intentional exit, no matter what that exit might be, which is what this
Absolutely.
show is all about.
Absolutely.
So sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to emphasize that. Yeah, so keep going.
Yeah. So all credit. That one's Leo Lax. I just took the lesson, but he's the one who gave it. But that was exactly it. It was that, like, and then again, we'll talk about how that advice then ultimately played out in real life with our exit and acquisition by EssayJack, by WizePrep. But those two experiences, the partnership with Nelson and having the opportunity to work with the fantastic mentors at LSpark, including Leo, who kind of made me think like, oh, okay, actually, like, I don't have to have it all decided at this point, but I need to make sure that I'm running this business in a way that if I ever decided, hey, I'm going to open the hood and seek external investment or look at the next steps, that I've already, like, I'm on top of everything. I've been tracking the right things from the get-go. I can talk about user data or customer acquisition costs or all of those sorts of things that ultimately matter in the tech business space, regardless of whether, if I just want this to be my super fun business that I run from my house and I don't ever really scale it. But and I can choose to do that if I've got everything in place. But if I choose to seek external investment and I haven't been tracking and I haven't been on top of that, that door gets closed. And so really being smart and understanding that, as I say, that bit of advice coupled with the opportunity really helped to push me along to begin to see EssayJack not as just a product that was really cool and changing the world and helping people to write, but that the business itself actually was cool and interesting and set a number of puzzles and problems for me to solve on that front. So
transition from academia to EssayJack was around 2015. Is
Yeah,
that right?
Yeah.
So then it was 2016 that you had something that was
Yes.
reasonably viable. You had some partnerships, like almost like a joint venture in essence, or with Nelson, and you joined LSpark, and then we got into real business mode. Okay, so take us to like the next kind of monumental point in time with EssayJack. What was that, and when was that?
So and we had so our early, like before we launched our beta product, the EssayJack adventure began in sort of late 2013, early 2014.
Oh, we had far back there.
We did so it was a little bit earlier. And I think that it was like 2011 or 2012 when I, left my job as a professor and I was like, okay, I'm going to figure this out. But so it was 2014 when we actually had an MVP that was very clunky, but we began testing and just kind of seeing like, does the market want this? And then by 2015, we had a kind of more built out product. By 2016, we were talking to Nelson. It was end of 2016 that we had signed a partnership agreement with them. By 2017, we were looking at global expansion. So all of that was happening. So
she says it very coolly, and then we were looking at global expansion.
and then because partly as well, this was once we had worked out the details of a 3-year partnership with Nelson, we kind of thought, okay, so that has Canada covered. We have a partnership and a team with this other sort of channel sales partner that has Canada covered. We've got lots of learnings we can get from Canada. So where do we go next? And for us in the English language learning space, Southeast Asia was a really was an opportunity that we thought was right for the picking. Now, to test whether our assumption of that opportunity was real or not, we again had the opportunity to partner with the University of Ottawa's business school, the Telfer Business School. They have an executive MBA, and typically one of the programs with that executive MBA is that the cohort students are broken down into teams and they're partnered with local companies, and then they are tasked with exploring an expansion to another region or another country. And so spring 2017, we were partnered with 6 amazing executive MBA students. We went for 10 days to Malaysia, and that's where we were going to sort of launch our expansion. The team we worked with was fantastic. So they set up, I think in the 10 days we were there, it was like 32 meetings.
Well,
and they would prepare. It was super exhausting, but they prepared, here's the one pager, here's who you're meeting with, here, whether it's demos or whatever. And so we just kind of had to show up and open our laptop and be like, here's EssayJack, do you want it? And on the back of that, we had enough to then say, all right, let's make the leap. And for the next little while, let's relocate to Southeast Asia. So we moved to Malaysia from 2017 to 2019. I was still kind of managing the Nelson partnership in Canada, overseeing the expansion overseas, but we were based in Kuala Lumpur. And then that allowed us access to Thailand, to Japan, to Australia, to Singapore, like all Hong Kong, all of that region. And very quickly, I think the first thing we did upon landing in summer 2017 in Malaysia, I think 2 days later, we were for 10 days at the Hong Kong Book Fair, which is a absolutely huge, like amazing, millions and millions of people come through this giant convention center, and they go to various different booths and they buy books, they buy technology. And so we had the opportunity to really get, in a short period of time, a lot of eyeballs on EssayJack and kind of build up partnerships. And then ultimately we were able to secure similar kind of sales partners in Asia as we had with Nelson in Canada. And that proved a really good template for us abroad.
Amazing. Wow. I didn't find any of that while I was doing my background. I am glad I asked that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So that takes us to not long before the world kind of went sideways, so 2020, what transpired in 2020 for EssayJack?
Yeah. So we were in some ways super fortunate because we had, by the end of 2019, we had kind of set up those sales partnerships in Asia. We kind of, again, we're like, okay, we now have things running. We'll go back to Canada. At the time, my husband and co-founder, who was and is a law professor, he had taken a leave, and it was like, okay, time to come back to Canada because you got to go back to the day job. I'll continue to oversee our sales teams now in different places in Asia. Make sure, because we were getting to the end of the partnership with Nelson, so then we were going to be able to take over that sales in Canada again. And so what was fantastic is that over the amount of time that we had been working with Nelson, so 2017, 18, and 19, in some of the larger sales opportunities, so school districts, we had been seeding different kinds of pilots. And so we wanted to then be like, okay, we'll come to the end of our partnership with Nelson, we'll be able to take over those sales. We know the ecosystem, we know the players, we have tons of connections. We'll be able to own that sales process from 2020 onwards. And so we had a couple with various different school districts that were quite far along in their conversations. And then March 2020, COVID happened. And what happened there is, like, in all of our modeling and everything. So again, we principally were doing B2B sales. So we would sell to schools, colleges, and universities. We had I think a Stripe portal for individual subscriptions, but that wasn't really where we were putting our attention. It was really, we work with schools, colleges, and universities. We do these licenses, great. We integrate with their learning management system. It's an easy and seamless integration. Fantastic. Then, but that has a very long sales process. So as I say, you might start with a classroom pilot and then a grade pilot and then a school pilot. And, by the time you get to the point where you're talking about a district. So we were finally at the point where we were like talking about districts with a couple of districts in Canada. And then COVID happened and those districts were like, look, like we love EssayJack, we love you, we love the product, but we are now just figuring out what do we even do? How do we get Chromebooks in the hands of kids?
Every day.
Everything.
Right?
It was just the like what happened. Teachers don't know what they're doing. What happened? And so we, in all of our modeling, you have your best case scenario, your worst case scenario, your medium, but we hadn't modeled out, like, 'cause you have the way that you do modeling, you have all your sales prospects and they're in your sales pipeline and you're kind of calculating what is the likely percentage that these will all materialize. And we didn't have a model that was what if 0% of these close, because we hadn't anticipated that was possible. Even in our worst case modeling, we're like, okay, if budgets being what they are or whatever, like you have to.
I froze. Are we back?
Okay, we are back now. Yeah, so I don't know at which part you dropped out, but all of that was just to say we hadn't anticipated zero closings. So then, but that is what happened. And so then we were faced with a super, as many were, a super hard decision. And so by 2020, we said, all right, we will, in the face of the fact that chances are nobody's buying this institutionally at the moment anyway, and it's March, and really the school year ends in June. So the loss that, so we then made the decision, well, let's just open the pay gates. Anybody who wants to sign up to use EssayJack can. So that's what we'll put our energy into. Because there are still all of these students who don't know how to write, who aren't learning how to write. Everybody's figuring out, we have no idea how long this pandemic is going to last. So let's just be there and support. And so EssayJack was open for free from March 2020. Finally, by September 2020, at that point, we're like, all right, we now have had all of these people signing up and using it individually. So, parents, kids, anybody who kind of felt worried that they were not mastering the skills of writing, let's let them sign up. So then we were able to, in September 2020, have individual subscriptions, turn back on the pay gateways, but we had a whole bunch of people we could market to. And so that really, from a business perspective, that was really great because it kind of hypercharged some of our growth while the pandemic had kind of settled down from an education perspective, but people were now really hungry for tools that could legitimately help them. And so that was good for us.
Wow. Yeah. It's just, I'm just absorbing the story to date. It's fantastic. Okay. So let's skip forward a tiny bit. And how did that dance come about in terms of leading up to being acquired? How was that introduced? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. And this is one part, and we haven't talked about this yet, but which is kind of the fundraising journey that EssayJack went on, which is ultimately tied to this acquisition journey. So back in 2017, when we had secured the partnership with Nelson, we then did our first fundraise, sort of on the back of that contract, because we were able to sort of more predictably set some projections. And so then we were looking to close a larger round in 2018. And this is one of the sort of traumas that is worth sharing, because it was probably one of the worst experiences I've ever had as an entrepreneur. But I also think some of it is my fault. So we had an investor who was interested in investing. We had all of the terms. We paid for the legals. Everything was great. And that was kind of end of the school year 2018. But then over the summer, as we were trying to close this round, like the investor, he was traveling, didn't hear back. And so luckily I had all the agreements, documented and everything like that. But ultimately my spidey sense was saying like, actually, maybe this investment, which you think is done, is maybe not done because we don't have a check in the bank yet. And so I didn't then go and like secure us a larger office space or start hiring people. I was just like, okay, well, we'll still continue with our growth plan and closing these sales, but I'm just going to wait because something is telling me something fishy is happening. But I still didn't really, because I still was like, well, we have the legal agreements and everything. But finally in September of 2018, that investor sort of came back with like a revised version of the legal agreement, which had all kinds of crazy things, including sort of a ratchet clause that said, if we didn't have a 50 million exit within 5 years, they would take 75% of the company. And it was just nuts. And so at the time I thought, okay, well, maybe like, did their legal
Sounds
team,
like the art of the deal.
So I honestly now think that it was what he and that investment arm was doing. They basically strung us along throughout the summer, knowing that come September, we now are rolling out our support to all of these sales that we've done. So all of these schools that have adopted EssayJack, we're now rolling out our support to get them up and running. And we would be so desperate that we would need the finances. We would sign anything and everything. Yeah. We would just sign at that point. And ultimately we just walked away and we just said like, once we clarified that this wasn't like a legal error, it wasn't some junior, clerk who had sort of thrown in some clause, but that this was intentional, we just sort of said, okay, well, thanks, but no thanks. And, not the right fit for us. But what that meant was that I, for that 2018-2019 academic year, I was doing the job of like 6 people because all of the customer support and all of that, we hadn't had the opportunity to scale up. So that then kind of put our fundraise a bit on a hiatus. So this gets us up to the sort of 2019 and COVID and all of that. Is that then by 2019, we're like, okay, now we are ready to restart that external investment raise. And, now that we've kind of survived from 2018 to 2019, when we thought things were going to go belly up, we're now in a good place. We can start looking at this sort of investment raise. And so then it was January 2020 that we kind of officially were like, all right, we are now out to market. We're doing this fundraise. Then of course, COVID, all of it. Yeah.
Psych.
Yeah, exactly. So that went on hold again. And so then, all right, it is now January 2021. We thought we were closing investment in 2018. We have somehow been able to keep going and keep growing. It's now 2021. We're now doing our fundraise. We have these good kind of COVID numbers and growth numbers. It's a different story that we are telling to investors. And as we were out pitching for external investment at that time, we had one response from a strategic investor, which said, how about we don't invest, we just acquire you? Like, what? So then I actually called up a Canadian EdTech CEO who I had connected with on LinkedIn and, knew their product. They had supplementary educational resources in the STEM space. The CEO is fantastic. They were growing. So I kind of reached out to him. I was like, hi, we had this acquisition question. Have you ever heard of this? Do you have any advice to give? And one of the things he said was, well, don't say yes to anybody else on an acquisition until we get a chance to put something on the table. I was like, oh my God. So then we had kind of
what's going on here?
So we had sort of 2 at play at this time, at least conceptually, And then, so then I went to our Asian distributor, who also has an investment arm. And I was like, look, I have these 2 other acquisition possibilities. You are already selling our product in Asia. Like, is this something that is of interest to you? And so we got sort of a positive on that and started going through due diligence. So then we kind of had 3 at play. And all of them were kind of different in terms of what the ultimate deal might look like, and the risks and opportunities that each of them sort of could have presented to us. And in the end, we had a letter of intent from the Canadian EdTech company, that CEO, who said, don't talk to anybody else unless you let us. So they put their offer on the table first, which I then went back to the other two and got, again, various kinds of offers, which I knew the details of. And it seemed like the Canadian EdTech offer, WizePrep, was going to be the best. And we kind of moved forward with that to see if we could make it work.
And like at this stage, wow, isn't that nice that it was a Canadian acquirer, right? Like in the environment in which we're in here in 2025.
Yeah, and that actually kind of played into it a little bit as well. So there's, so really we were still kind of early stage. So yes, it was from 2015 to 2021, 6 years, is a reasonable amount of time for an exit, but it's still pretty early. And it was early for us, and we still felt very early, like we were still kind of very scrappy and early stage. So there were other factors other than just like, hey, you're going to get a giant bag of cash on this acquisition, that I was kind of juggling. So for instance, with the Asian distributor, part of it would have been like, so what if, because it would have been a tranched acquisition, so the payment would come in time. And I thought, like, so what if we get the first chunk of money and then nothing else? Am I going to have the capacity to litigate in a foreign jurisdiction? And the answer to that was like, no, and that opportunity was also going to be, I don't have, like, there's no future for me in that company. They will take everything and they will kind of take it and run with it. And that'll be the end of my story, which is fine, but it was different. And so
for some people, for some founders, that's important. They want just to be able to go on and do whatever was coming up next for them, right? But sounds like for you, you wanted to have some continuous impact in what EssayJack was providing to the end user.
Absolutely. Like, I still kind of felt like my part of the journey was maybe as yet incomplete. And then one of the other acquirers, that one was really, while they liked the software and the business, really they wanted to acquire me. They were interested in having me come and join their team. And that was more of a, like a college prep company that sort of, and I thought, wow, it's like, it's interesting, but it's a different space. And I just don't know. Whereas the Canadian EdTech company, as I say, I knew the CEO absolutely, like the things that I lacked as a CEO. Like, I was never a fantastic fundraiser and, all that. Whereas he's amazing at that. Like, he'll talk to you for 5 minutes and you will like him. And, he's just so believable and credible and, an amazing CEO. And so I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to jump into kind of partnership with another ed tech company, it's in Canada, I know the team, that's kind of why that one was the most appealing. But then we set ourselves a very ambitious timeline, because in the back of my mind, I'm still thinking, well, if this already started engaging in on a fundraise, so let's see if we can do this acquisition in 30 days. Because I thought for 30 days, I can still kind of string along all these investors I'm in conversation with. And if at the end of the 30 days, this acquisition doesn't happen, I've not entirely ruined everything on the investment front. I can reboot those conversations and keep the business going.
Wow.
Whereas if you
that is very ambitious.
Super ambitious. Whereas if you enter in, I was just very mindful of the fact that if we don't try to time box this, it'll drag out. And ultimately then, whether I like it or not, an investment opportunity is going to be off the table, because like our runway is just disappearing, with every kind of moment. So that was tough. Happily I can say that we did get through that in 30 days, but it was a really tough 30 days, because I was still running the business and then also doing kind of due diligence full time, answering their questions, providing them with information, as well as, finding out as much as I possibly could about this company that I was then going to be joining forces with.
There's something interesting about human nature and having deadlines, though, right? Like, isn't it Parkinson's law that, if you had stretched it out to 60 days, it would have taken 60 days. I mean, 30 days was
Yeah.
very ambitious given,
Yes.
all the complexity there, but there is something about setting up a specific box. I think we froze again. I'm just waiting for it to come back.
Yep,
Okay,
you're
it
back.
froze
You were
again.
just saying 30 days is very ambitious.
Very
So I don't.
ambitious, but there is something about creating this box where you have to get it done. And if it's
Yeah.
important, it gets done. But at the end of the 30 days, had it not gotten done, it would have been so much closer that you would have been able to make a
Yeah.
determination. Can we take another 15 or 30 days?
Yeah.
Or or do I need to just cut this off and move on? No, I think, wow, amazing.
Yeah. And that was one of the things that I learned. So again, so I learned all this business stuff, obviously, in being an entrepreneur. Oh, there we are. We're back again. I don't know if when that happens, if you can still hear me or not, but
I can't.
So, okay.
I must be freezing on your side and you're
Yeah.
freezing on my side. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah. So what I learned a lot about was like tech processes, development processes. And one of the things that came out of that was, as I say, this idea of time boxing. So sometimes with our tech team, if we had sort of a feature we were developing or an idea that we wanted to pursue, we'd say, okay, well, let's time box this, see as a developer what you can do in 2 days on this problem or this feature. And then we can have a full discussion about, yes, I think we're going to build it out or not. But if you just start and say, okay, yeah, build out this feature, and then as you go in, you find out that it's far more complex, the business case might not be there for it. Like it's different to say, oh, this is a nice to have. So if it takes you 10 hours of coding, do it. If it takes you 10 months of coding, it's not worth it.
Right.
And sometimes you don't know that in advance. So if you just set that time box and say, okay, we'll only spend this amount of time on it. So that kind of informed the 30-day due diligence, was just this idea of, well, let's time box it. And then to your point, we'll see where we get. As it turned out, I think maybe it was like 2 extra days or something, but that was over the Canada Day. So, we could say it was a statutory holiday to get it done.
Doesn't really count.
Yeah.
Wow. So successful exit, you stayed on, worked with the acquirer for a bit of time. And was that part of the acquisition, that it was a specific period of time, or was it a little bit open-ended and you just decided, okay, now it's time for me to move on? What did that look like? Or if you can't say, that's okay too, right?
Yeah.
But whatever you can share.
No, I can. So certainly my joining was part of the acquisition. I mean, we kind of joke about it that yes, it was an acquisition, but it was almost more of a like partnership or a merging. Like we were really kind of, because as I say, WizePrep had really strong resources in the STEM space, but they didn't have anything in the writing space. So it was like, okay, come in and add this additional kind of area into the company. And then, also sort of come in and help on that leadership team for WizePrep. There was no specific end date and time. I had told myself, I wasn't going to think of any change, at least for 12 months. I was like, I am burnt out. I am, I'm happy to be on the other side of this acquisition. I'm going to give this team that I think is a really great team to join, at least a year and see where we land within a year. I'm not going to make any hasty decisions too soon. And then we got to the end of that year and I was like, actually, really love this team, love what we're building. My mandate was more than just integrating EssayJack as WizeWriter into the WizePrep family, but I ended up sort of touching all lines of the business within WizePrep and really like that. So I was like, all right, I will. And again, I was still thinking, okay, I will give it another year and then see where it goes. And WizePrep is based in Vancouver and I live in Ottawa. And so while this was all still COVID-y in 2021, that was fine. So 21 to 2022, I mean, everybody works remote, you know, WizePrep is a remote team, all of that. By spring 2023, you know, the world broadly speaking is opening up. And so even though everybody was still remote work and work from home, what I was finding is that time difference between Ottawa and Vancouver meant that the rest of the C-suite was in Vancouver and I was in Ottawa. So there were fewer opportunities for that, you know, in-person networking, catching up and all that. So I was able to kind of think to myself and be like, okay, well, like, and I continue to be an investor in WizePrep. As an investor, I can see that this is not necessarily going to be the most productive way forward, is to have your leadership team not able to just catch up after work. You know, like,
there's something about some of those just like one-off conversations that can really be change making.
Absolutely. And so if the COO and the CEO can't just walk around the block and have a coffee chat, and it has to be a like, hey, Lindy, you want to set up a Zoom, and it, you know, creates this kind of formality to some of that. As an investor, I could see this is not going to work long term. You know, as an employee, as a member of the leadership team, I, you know, wasn't necessarily ready to run away, but I was kind of split in terms of how I was looking at things. So we had a chat and I said, you know, like, I don't think long term, you know, it's going to work forever. And so then the conversation was more of a timing thing. So again, because the education year is on cycles, I was like, well, you know, do I leave in the spring, summer of 2023? Do I stay till the end of the calendar year? But then that's the middle of the academic year. And so we just sort of said, you know what, let's cut our losses sort of summer 2023, you know, continue on, you know, shareholder, you know, friend of the company, cheerleader, you know, all of those sorts of things. And then for me as well, I was like, yep, I can actually like take a breath, because I haven't since probably 2013 or 2014. So it was a good 10 years, you know, head down, 110% moving forward on the entrepreneurship journey. And so I was ready to just stare at the blue sky for a little while.
Take a break, take a breath. Yeah. So how much time did you set aside? How much time did you end up setting aside, Lindy, before you moved into the next?
So it was the summer of 2023. And then by the fall, I started to tell kind of everybody I knew in the ecosystem that I'd be looking for my next chapter. And at that point, I wasn't even sure what it would be. It would, you know, it's like, I now know all this stuff about entrepreneurship. So it makes sense if I'm still doing something in tech and entrepreneurship before the things that I know are out of date or are no longer helpful. Like, how do I give back? How do I help young entrepreneurs not make all the mistakes I made? You know, like those kind of things. You know, but I was also thinking like, well, maybe I'm at the point where maybe I'll do some not-for-profit work and, you know, give back. And so I joined some boards. I was thinking about, you know, do I want to get into, you know, accelerators, incubators, venture capital, like all of those kind of things. And then by I think it was November 2023 that I was then in a couple of sort of serious job prospects within the tech and entrepreneur space. And RBC X was one of those that I think I had, you know, my first meetup in November 2023.
Yeah. So academic, founder, banker. So so tell us a little bit about what RBX brings to the table for the founder community, and what is your role in all of that?
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting how it even came up. So there was a post on LinkedIn for a job in RBC X relationship management in Ottawa. So I was like, I don't know, really, like relationship. That sounds like maybe
I got
something
that.
I was like, I know people, and I, you know, like maybe this is an opportunity to give back in tech and whatever, and, you know. And then a number of people were pinging me on LinkedIn and saying, hey, did you see this? You'd be a great fit for this. And the big thing that I was saying was like, but I'm not a banker, so like I don't, you know, I don't see what you're seeing in terms of it being a good fit. And I was able to have a couple of coffee chats with some people who knew what RBCX was doing. And so to answer your question, I mean, RBCX, yes, there's RBCX banking, which provides, innovative tech financial solutions for tech companies. So companies that say traditionally find it hard to be in the lending space because, how you secure debt is different for tech companies than when you've got hard goods that you can secure against. And so that's been a puzzle that a lot of tech banks have been kind of trying to figure out. So that's one piece for sure. But a lot of it is the partnership within the ecosystem. So how do you share advice? How do you make connections? How do you network? How do you share the things that you know? And so as I started to get a sense that maybe RBCX was not just straight up, you're analyzing loan to value ratios all day long and putting together underwriting credit, although there is some of that, but but once I kind of understood that it was more than that, that there was this. All right, we are back again. So
we are back again. This is fantastic. I'm going to be putting a small disclaimer at the beginning of our episode, well, just in case from an editing perspective. So it's beyond just the loan to value ratios and the pure metrics of lending when it comes to the services that are available through RBX. So you can continue from there.
So that they're with RBCX, there is this sort of genuine relationship component, and so across all elements. So RBCX itself has a couple of different divisions. One part we do buy and grow companies. So there are 4 tech companies owned by RBCX that are being scaled right now. So again, there's like a wealth of information from those 4 companies that we can then share with all of our other companies about what it takes to scale and grow a company. We've got all kinds of technical expertise right within our organization. RBCX as well is an investor in 18 venture capital funds across the country. So again, we have a very easy way of providing our clients access to those venture capital funds if there's a good fit. Like that close relationship is really helpful. We have on the rbcx.com blog, there's all kinds of thought leadership advice, strategic information that's really helpful for the companies we can work with. And then we work with all kinds of accelerators and incubators all across the country to be able to sort of really be plugged into the tech ecosystem. So it's this whole holistic, magical thing that I didn't know of at the end of 2023 when I first started to be like, hey, but I'm not a banker. And so as it turned out, I reached out to the regional director and said like, hey, a bunch of people are telling me I should think about this relationship management job in Ottawa. Like, full disclosure, I'm not a banker. Like, I don't, they're telling me RBCX does all these wonderful different things, but is it true? And then it so happened that many of the same people who were telling me, hey, you should really think about this, had also reached out to him and said, hey, have you ever met Lindy? She would be a really good fit. And so it was one of those really lovely kind of push and pull moments where when I reached out and said like, hey, you don't know me, he was able to say like, actually, a bunch of people just kind of messaged me about you.
Kind of blind date like story.
It was, it was kind of. And
like
then,
matchmaking,
and again, it was
blind date.
It was totally like this kind of matchmaking where, other people are like, hey, have you met her? Hey, have you met him? And so then we went and had that kind of coffee, which then turned into, a multiple kind of interview process. And the thing that I think RBCX wanted to really confirm for themselves was that I would be willing to learn the banking piece. They, I think, quickly got the confidence that all of those other lovely pieces around, branding and relationships and client support and all of those things that I had demonstrated I could do, but I hadn't demonstrated that I, could do banking. And so I had to really be like, look, I can learn, I am open to learn, and I recognize that that's the piece that I'm going to have to fill in. And so I joined in February 2024. So we're just over a year. And, I surprise myself sometimes with how much I know about the banking and finance space at this point.
Well, it's it's my pleasure to have met you. And I guess when we sat down initially, you were probably close to your 1 year
Yeah, yeah.
anniversary. We're recording this in on a quasi snowy day in April, probably
Yeah,
to
yeah.
air a
It
few months
doesn't
down
yet
the
feel
road.
like spring.
Doesn't
Yeah.
yet feel like spring, but I think when we first met was a day where I had invited your group in for a chat about
Mhm.
what I'm doing here on the podcast and
Yeah,
supporting CEO, founder, business owners, and that's kind of how we ended up here today.
yeah, yeah,
So I'm really, I'm really excited to be part of RBC myself. I mean, I was part of another large FI in the past and transitioned my client base over. It'll be 9 years this summer that I've been with
wow.
RBC of my very long tenured career in call it banking, wealth management, really, problem solving for,
Yeah,
how do I get financial freedom? That's sort of the broad area that we're looking at. So I'm really grateful to have had that opportunity and have really had a chance to get to know you today and share your story.
yeah,
There's so much here to share, and clearly you have a lot to offer the community of founders in Ottawa, and then some. But your boots on the ground here in Ottawa, so
yeah,
that's great.
yeah.
We could probably keep talking for much longer, but between the unstable Wi-Fi that I'm experiencing here and looking to have something that's quite digestible, let's move towards wrapping this up for the
Sure,
moment, for
sure.
today. And what I'd like to do at the end of all my chats is to ask for one piece of fun, frank advice. Like it's a solid aspect of all of my podcasts. Lindy, what would be one piece of fun, frank advice you'd like to leave to the self-made nation?
Um, I would say be very self-aware of the kind of exit that you want and the kind of CEO you'd like to be. A VC-backed CEO, a bootstrapped CEO, a private equity CEO, a CEO of a publicly listed company. Those are all very, very different roles and different outcomes. So kind of know yourself and know what it is that you're wanting in that exit.
Love it. Thanks so much for being here and putting up with as I say, this interesting Wi-Fi that I've got going on today.
Yeah. I blame it on the snow and ice that are probably
I will
on the
go.
wires somewhere.
I will accept that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.